Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to each and every one of you, and a very, very warm welcome to Rachel Fink. Hello, Rachel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to see you, Yoni.
Fabulous to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very honored. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening is week one of Compelling Conversations, an interactive educational event where we get a chance to meet fascinating people leading fascinating lives and find out about what they do and find out about very interesting contemporary topics. And tonight, we are privileged to be meeting my previous boss, Rachel Fink, the head teacher of JFS School, where I have the privilege of working for 10 years. And Rachel, it's great to see you. First of all, how are you and your family? How's everything going in this crazy time we are living in?
My family as well, thank you very much. I think live a fascinating life. I'm laughing. I'm not sure how fascinating all our lives are at the moment. But thank God we are all, even though I have family scattered around northwest London and in Israel as well. So that's the challenge for us all during these times.
Well, big mazel tov to you on becoming a grandmother. And
yes.
That's very exciting. And we're delighted that you found some time in your busy schedule to come and have a chat with us. So Rachel, my first question this evening, and just the way this is going to work for our listeners who are joining us on Facebook Live and on the St. John's Wood Synagogue Zoom page, I'm going to ask Rachel a series of questions. We're going to have a bit of a dialogue and conversation. If you wish to write something in the chat box to join the conversation, feel free. And then we're going to unmute people and open it up for more of a Q&A with Rachel as well. And we're very excited for this. So first of all, Rachel, could you just tell us a little bit about what is it like to lead one of the largest Jewish schools in the world, to be the head teacher of JFS School? Tell us what that's like.
So I'm actually going to try and pretend there's no pandemic and school is running as usual, because I think that those are two quite different scenarios. First of all, it's a huge privilege and a real honor. I've been in education, I would say now, for more than 25 years. I've taught in a variety of schools, and many people listening this evening might know that I was a JFS girl myself. So there is something rather special about leading a school that gave you so much as a student. And I know how much JFS shaped the person I became and have become. And, we often talk in life about paying things forward. Well, I'm hoping that I'm paying it forward on a massive scale. It's a challenging job, something new. No 2 days are different, and but there's something really quite unique about JFS. I think, first of all, in terms of its history, because most people will probably know that JFS has been around for nearly 300 years in various guises. So it has a huge history, not only in terms of the Anglo-Jewish community, but intertwined with British history. And it's also grown enormously. And that's an exciting part of running a school with so many students from such diverse backgrounds, all wanting a very high standard of education within a Jewish environment.
Absolutely. And, talking about diverse backgrounds, I can tell you, having spent those years myself in the classroom, which was really a highlight for me, the children come from everywhere and anywhere across London, Jewish and non-Jewish, children from all different Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Orthodox, traditional, secular homes, some of whom are very connected to the community, some are less connected, some go to Orthodox synagogues, some go to Reform synagogues, and there's a huge array of students to cater for, which must be, in a sense, overwhelming and a huge challenge. So perhaps you want to share with us a little bit of how do you manage to cater for such a broad spectrum of students?
So yes, your description is correct. I think you probably know the student body better than me. I've only been in place just 2 years as passed. It's my 2-year anniversary at the school. I think from my perspective, the objective that we want is that every child who comes through JFS leaves in a way where they have a very strong Jewish identity that is personal to them. Everybody connects to their Yiddishkeit in a different way. And our job is to offer that, understand where a child is coming from, but whether it be quite religious or nothing at all, and various things in between. And be able to, I always describe it to people as laying out a kiddush or laying out a buffet where there's lots and lots of things to try. And my job is to encourage you to taste everything on offer and go back for more for the things that you like best, because they're the things that you identify and connect with. So it could be textual learning, but at the same time, it could be volunteering. It could be learning to speak Ivrit so that you can really connect with Jewish people around the world. I think British Jews are probably much like other Brits who are not very good at learning other languages, but we've got this ability to walk abroad, and if you can anywhere in the world, you know, your ear suddenly attunes to Ivrit. You feel an opportunity, a way of connecting with other people who you know automatically share something in common with you, your heritage and where you're coming from. So anything that engages students in that way is really what we're about. And I think over the past few years, particularly the curriculum, and I talk about, when I say curriculum, I mean the formal curriculum and the informal curriculum. JFS is renowned for its incredible informal education program. They come together to really offer those experiences. I think experiential Judaism is very important. It's a way, I think we are living in times where spirituality is increasingly important. People are trying to find themselves. And actually, you don't have to look too far. You don't have to travel to Goa or to the Far East or somewhere else to find meaning. We have a lot of meaning on offer. We want to share that with young people, because I think that also gives them a strong foundation for their futures. I think if you're the way you move forward in life, however Jewishly you choose to live, if you've got that strong foundation, it underpins everything you do, and it grounds you and it helps you. For example, in the current crisis that we're in, I think that if you've got sort of faith and connection of some description, I think that provides a sense of security and direction for you.
Absolutely. I think my listeners will, particularly from the St. John's Wood crowd, relate to the Kiddush analogy. We like a good Kiddush. And I think that's so true because, you know, in JFS, there's such a plethora of subjects and options. And if I could just, if you would allow me and indulge me, I've got some of my highlights from my photos when I was at JFS. And I put together a few photos here just to share with you from my time there. These were photos taken over 10 years at JFS, which I hope you can all see now. And I look back at this time with such happy memories. And just looking at this class, this was my JS class 2009, 2010. They're now in their mid to late 20s, these students. There I am holding the only football trophy I'll ever get from the gift they gave me when I left. They presented me with a Kiddush cup. But for me, what was the most amazing thing about teaching these students and engaging with them was, as you say, the amazing amount of opportunity that you present. Here are some pictures from Purim, the great JS department who I was privileged to work with. And as you mentioned, some of the extracurricular stuff that goes on at JFS. I think what might be really interesting for our listeners, if you could just share with us and perhaps build a little bit of a picture of when we talk about curriculum. I know it's been in the press and everyone is wondering, how do you kind of build your curriculum and how do you make sure that it's totally up to date, contemporary and relevant to what's going on? I know, you know, we've all been reading the press. Hundreds of ex-students wrote to you and have urged you to adopt a decolonized curriculum, providing your students with an honest portrayal of the British Empire during the slave trade period. Can you share with us a little bit more details about how that happened and what was your response and the school's response to that very important and challenging question?
It was interesting. Before I answer, I have many photos like you showed me, except I'm wearing the uniform and I still have them to this day. I treasure them enormously. But in answer to this question, this is an open letter, so it's yet to arrive at me directly. So that's the first point I think is important to stress, although I have read it and I can see what it says. I think since the murder of George Floyd, whilst everyone thinks if teachers are focused online, the educational conversations haven't gone away. And this is something we started to talk about anyway. And I've done a bit of digging actually and a bit of research to see, you know, what I think I know about what we do, because in a big school, it's really hard to know every unit and every topic of every curriculum and every subject. What I think we do is what we do. And I'm very confident that the topics that we're teaching and we have been doing for a while, meet that. For example, we're constrained by the national curriculum, as all state schools are, which means that you have to follow certain topics and teach certain pieces of literature. And that might mean that you're limited in some respects to meeting certain requirements. Within that, there is choice. Take history, for example. We teach at Key Stage 3, which in old money is the first, second, and third year. It's year 7, 8, and 9. So all students are studying history at this stage. And we really have built a curriculum whereby in year 7, they study a comparison, if you like, between medieval Britain and medieval Africa. Well, if anyone knows their history, they'll know about the richness of Africa in pre-colonial days. And it actually sets the context for a better understanding of the horrors and the tragedy of the slave trade that they learn in year 8, because it's not just about African people becoming slaves, it's also about what was taken away from the lifestyles and the things that they did beforehand. In year 9, they're learning about civil rights through the Black Civil Rights Movement, and that continues through history. Most of our students, history is probably the most popular GCSE option. And then in terms of this particular area, at sixth form, if you're taking subjects like politics, history, and sociology, you're going to cover a lot of that. But I think that these topics also come up in Jewish studies, and the Jewish studies curriculum has undergone quite a change in the last few years, with real focus on sort of learning begins by learning and understanding about your own culture and your own background. And I think sometimes we, because this is a predominantly Ashkenazi community in this country, albeit arriving secondary to Sephardim, it can be very easy to not teach the culture and history, Jewish history of other communities. But now in our Jewish history community, there are topics like the Jews of Iraq, Operation Moses, the Ethiopian Jewry, for example, and we're building on that all the time, Sephardi curriculum. So if you were a student who left JFS a few years ago, I can completely understand why your reflections might be that none of this stuff was covered. Similarly, you know, when I arrived, there was no education on LGBT issues. Interfaith was embryonic. And these things are really developing quite rapidly across the school, often in settings beyond the classroom, giving more students access. What I would say is, you know, where could we be doing better? And I think any educational institution, regardless of a particular hot topic of the day, curriculum is always important. You should always be looking at what you're doing. Is what you're teaching not only in line with, let's say, government guidelines, but is it relevant to the lives of the students? Is it appropriate? Is it going to help educate them and make them better human beings? So we try and do lots of things beyond the classroom. So at JFS, we have a Holocaust Memorial Day workshop that is we host for Brent schools and JFS students as well. So students from across Brent secondary schools, so from a huge array of cultural backgrounds, come to the school for a day. Collectively, they're listening to a survivor, and the rest of the day is learning about aspects of the Shoah and prejudice, but the angle is about what do you therefore do about it? How do you become an upstander, not a bystander? Not about woe is me, I'm a Jew and I suffered. That's important, and we mark those points in the school calendar. But at the same time, there are days where it's more appropriate to say, Jews don't own suffering, but we have a responsibility because we have suffered as a people to recognize and speak out and speak up when others suffer. And that's the message of that. Where can the impact be greater? Can we include more JFS students in that? Can we engage them more? And can we consciously see that it's making the impact we want to have it? We can say we taught it, but if they didn't come away feeling that they've learnt about that topic, should we be more explicit? I might argue that some of the activism that you're seeing from JFS students is as a direct result of the things they learnt about speaking up for themselves when they were at school.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember going back a decade on the JS curriculum, teaching the students about Rosa Parks and learning a lot about civil rights, learning also about, when we talked the Holocaust, we brought in a survivor of the Rwandan genocide as a speaker to show the diversity of suffering. But that's great to hear, and it's wonderful to hear the way in which you are constantly reviewing, improving, and enhancing the education at JFS. Let's talk a little bit about Jewish education. Now, I know firsthand what an amazing department you have, led very ably by Simon Rinkoff, who is a dear friend and an incredible department head. First of all, mazel tov to you on your recent outstanding Peacock. I'm sure that had nothing to do with me leaving the school, but I hope to say I sowed the seeds. So that was really amazing. If you could just give our listeners a little bit of an overview of the Jewish education, specifically, what is your ambition for that child who walks in at 11 years old? What's your ambition for them to leave at 18 years old with what tools in their toolkit in terms of Jewish education?
If I may, I don't know if everybody that's watching knows what Peacock is, but faith schools by law have to have what's called a Section 48 inspection alongside Ofsted, which inspects the Jewish element or the faith element of education. So the Jewish inspectorate is called Peacock, which is inspected every 5 years. So we recently had our inspection. I think it was the last major event before lockdown. So we build our curriculum on the premise, imagine a student walking into the school, obviously they're coming from a variety of backgrounds, but somebody who perhaps comes in knowing not a great deal, although that would be a little bit disingenuous because about 75% of our students have come from a Jewish primary school. And of those that don't, many have been engaged with Cheder. However, we want to make sure that they are comfortable, confident, and knowledgeable. I wouldn't want, and that seems like a low bar to set, but I think the world is changing. I think we can see now schools are going to, as we move into the future, run in different ways. I want people to be able to read Hebrew. My dream is that anybody, regardless of how religious they are, feel comfortable that Jewish texts belong to them as much as they might belong to the more religious, that they can engage with that, they can understand the analysis, the history, the arguments, and that they can find some relevance to their own lives. I want people to have a love of Israel. I think that Israel is really central to who we are as a people. I see no conflict between being a avid supporter of Israel and an upstanding and engaged member of British society. I say that as somebody who's lived in Israel myself, grew up here. I think that both marry very well together. I think that we have one of the things I did when I first came to the school, and you'll know this, Yoni, is really re-establish the school's ethos, what we stand for, because I think I came at a time where nobody was really clear what was JFS about and what's the message that we're trying to send. And I think that kind of, from that emanates everything we're trying to do. So the school motto is Oravikar, which means light and honor. It comes from the pasuk at the end of Megillah Esther, and we also say it at Havdalah. People will be familiar with La Yodim, Haita, Orav Simcha V'Sason Vikar, the idea that Jews have light and honor, a concept that being Jewish brings with it responsibility, and you need to be a responsible human being. You start by being a responsible human being, by being responsible to yourself, being responsible to your family, doing things that bring that make the world a better place and bring respect to everyone around you. I do believe that students should be well educated. If we can teach students to a high level of Shakespeare, we should be able to engage them in Jewish texts. But I appreciate and recognize that the average JFS student is quite a long way away from that and may never inch that way, even by the time they've left school. However, if we've lit a spark that makes them want to continue to be engaged in Jewish learning, that's really important, because we're the people of the book. That's what we do. Jews learn. That's why we're still here. I want people to be interested. If you want to be a good and effective member of society, you've got to know who you are and where you come from. So anything that's experiential. So we take students to Israel, we take students to Poland, really so that they can self-reflect and think about, what do I know? What do I need to know more? What we're offering at school, you've mentioned, you've referenced Purim, which is a massive highlight at JFS, as is Yom Ha'atzmaut. On the back of the fact that students tell me that they love the Chagim at school, we're now going to be opening on Sukkot. I recognize that we're a school of 2,000 students and maybe 10% come from families where they'll build a sukkah. Now, sure. Education, that's negligent not to offer that opportunity to others. I want people to come away saying Judaism's full of do's and positive experiences, rather than it's a book full of no's, you can't do this, you can't do that.
I think if I could just also add, and I fully agree with what you've said, but from my perspective, having been in the school for many years, and now I'm kind of on the other side of the coin working with families in the United Synagogue, it's important for families who are listening to this to recognize it's a partnership. And the students are in school between 8:30 and 3:30, but there's then between 3:30 and 8:30. And in terms of building up that Jewish education, those messages often may not be shared messages with what they're hearing in their JS classroom to the food that they're eating at their dinner table. And that can sometimes be a challenge. And I think it's important for parents to recognize their expectations, that they would want to, if they want to raise their children to have a really, really strong Jewish education and a strong practicing Jewish education, which may or may not be an aspiration for them, there is a partnership. Talking of which, what ways do you partner with other organizations, including the United Synagogue? I know we used to have the Rabbis Roadshow where the United Synagogue rabbis would come in, but could you tell us a little bit about how you partner with other organizations? Because there's so much going on in London, especially you mentioned how the world's changing, and how's that gonna, how does that partnership work, if you could tell us, with other organizations?
Oh gosh, where to begin? What would be the most interesting things? That's real. Let me think about that.
While you're thinking about that, just to tell our audience, some people have already written in some questions on the chat. If you have more questions, please feel free to write them either directly to me or to the entire audience, and we'll try and get through some of those shortly.
I know I'm going to miss people out, but I'm going to think about the things that we do. So any opportunity where the students can learn about something else, engage with something different, we'll partner with. So there's a very comprehensive PSHE syllabus, citizenship, etc., that sort of thing, personal, social. We work hard with the JLGB. Lots of our students do Duke of Edinburgh. Hundreds of students at JFS go through the Duke of Edinburgh and achieve as far as silver and gold as well, which I know often everybody does bronze and falls by the wayside. So we're strong partners with the JLGB. We have students who participate in the Wings of Hope Achievement Award. That's something quite new that I've brought with me. That's an organisation that raises awareness about the educational situation for students in developing countries. And it's a fascinating charity, and it's a very outward focused looking experience for them. We work with the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. We work with JWA. We work with Keshet UK as part of our delivery for LGBT education. Who else do we work with? Chazak has started to come to work with the school to help us develop even further the work that we're doing with the Sephardi, on Sephardi heritage, and to help strengthen the identity of students from Sephardi backgrounds. Oh, goodness me, Model UN, debate, everything. It's
endless, it's endless. There's more that goes on in a week in JFS than in a term in most schools. I know J-Roots as well. I don't know if you mentioned J-Roots.
Yeah.
Some of the incredible stuff they do, and I know, having led 6 Poland trips myself with the school.
This wasn't what we.
You mentioned extracurricular trips such as Poland. You do a taste of Israel. You do the scheme in Israel, Lev, the new Lavi scheme. Can I ask you just a question, moving forward the conversation a little bit, about
9 o'clock.
how is the school going to be adapting and changing in the post-corona world? I know obviously the whole world has changed, but if you could give us your perspective, perhaps not only about JFS, but broadly, how is education going to change? And how is your job description as head teacher going to change in the post-corona world?
So from a perspective of education, you're right. It's terrible that I didn't think of J-Roots. They'll go mad with me afterwards that I didn't mention them. But we work heavily with J-Roots, and maybe I'll talk about some of those trips actually. And JFS, many of you will know, have had a very long standing connection with residential trips in Israel. This year, we had our first group going to a new program at the American High School in Hod HaSharon, and they spend 3 months in Israel. So I think, first of all, things that will change dramatically is the way that trips are able to run. It's a conversation we're beginning to have now. These are really important to us because they bring so much to the JFS experience. And honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure from a logistical perspective how those are going to continue, or when they might restart, and how we might have to adapt them. And that worries me deeply because they are so impactful for a student. Financially, there is no question that that is going to change things. I think there's some of the good things that have come out of this are a much stronger homeschool partnership. I think the way that we as staff and parents have communicated with one another during this period, even when things are not quite right or nobody's quite sure of what the answer is, in a way that we never have before. And I think it sets an incredible example to our young people about respect and understanding when we have different opinions. And I think that that's really something beautiful. And I'm looking to work out how do I bottle that and keep that going. I think we are going to exploit the online world and see how do we make it more effective. I think the structure of the English school system hasn't changed for several hundreds of years, and maybe now is the time to look and see creatively how we might do things differently. I could be pretty controversial and say, you know, I think that there's a place for relooking at the types of exams that we ask our children to sit and when we sit them. There is no question that mental health and the way we live our lives, what we value in life, I would like to see really coming to the forefront of education. I think there are many families who have, whilst there have been some difficulties, there have been some real positives about strengthened family life. You yourself said the number of people who've been able to engage in events that the United Synagogue is running. I hear about people engaging with shul activities who are on their communities in a way they don't ordinarily do so. And I think we need to find a way of continuing these partnerships and continuing them forward. I don't enjoy looking into a screen all day. That's hard going. But the concept that there is a place for online learning, for reaching out to far more people, is fantastic. The thing that worries me, and I think it worries all businesses, is how we're going to do that financially. We have been for many years reliant on the voluntary contributions. All the wonderful things I talk about at JFS do not come out, do not come as part of the government pot, if you like. If we want to do the things that we do, we are heavily dependent on the contributions we receive, either through parental voluntary contributions or through donations. And we've seen that. We've seen that this week in terms of us offering an additional class for year 7. People might know that there's a number of children who hadn't yet got a place in a Jewish secondary school for September. And this is slowly sorting itself out, because I said, I don't want to see a child who lost to the Jewish community because somewhere between the schools we couldn't find a spot for them. But that comes with added financial obligations that we are going to have to manage. So I could potentially become a full-time fundraiser. It's not really what I want to do, but I think there's value. I know that it's been hugely important over the last few months to support the frontline services. But if we're looking to the future, we need to invest in community. And actually the centers of our communities, in some respects, certainly the future, it starts with the schools, particularly people who are not connected to communities in the way that perhaps older members are, because they grew up with the concept of a shul, that it's not so prevalent today.
I know when I first began teaching, we used to have home hospitality a lot, where the students would come to us for Shabbat meals. In fact, the first time Dina and I ever entertained, we had 28 sixth formers from JFS around our Shabbat table. It was quite an exciting Friday night for newlyweds. But there was a budget for those type of things. There was a budget to help people for gap years. There was a budget to help people with a plethora of things. And I know firsthand that these budgets are now squeezed, and it is a tremendous challenge for schools moving forward. In terms of, I know there are people watching this right now who are thinking for their own children, what school should I send my kid to? And some are thinking of some amazing Jewish schools, some are thinking of some incredible non-Jewish schools. I remember my mother always telling the story. She grew up at a time when she went to a non-Jewish school. There were very few Jewish school options available, and she had a very negative experience. And she described how when she first took my older brothers to Northwest, and she walked in and she saw the Jewish children sitting at the table saying Birchat Hamazon and benching together, she just burst into tears. She was so overcome with emotion of what a Jewish school has to offer. And my next question for you is really, Rachel, for those parents who are thinking about what school they should send their child to, why should they send their child to a Jewish school? Or should they send their child to a Jewish school? And what would you tell those parents?
I'm probably a little biased because of the job that I do, but I also was privileged to be one of those who had a Jewish education throughout, from primary school all the way through. When it came to secondary school, I was actually given the choice. I got into a private school, a well-known school, I won't say which one, and I was given the choice, where did I want to go to school? And I was adamant that I was going to go to JFS because obviously I would go to a Jewish school because I think, I thought that was important to me. I just wanted to see that I was good enough to get in somewhere else. So why should you choose a Jewish school? Well, I think, first of all, I think we're very blessed in the community. The choice and the caliber of the Jewish schools today are beyond anything I think anybody imagined maybe 30, 40 years ago that the community could offer. I know that people who send their children to JFS or to the other Jewish secondary schools in the main predominantly do so because they want their children to get an outstanding secular education and they want to be able to give them the best opportunities moving on, whether that's because they want their children to go to Oxbridge or they want their children to have a fantastic vocational career, opportunities for apprenticeships. They want their child to be able to stand out in whichever field they're going into. I would say, so first of all, the Jewish state schools that we have, we are always, if you care about league tables, we are always up there amongst the top, in the top 10 of the comprehensive schools every year in the country, if you're going to measure us by exam results. As an educator, I don't think that exam results are everything. I don't think if we are to define our young people solely by the qualifications they have, we're doing them a huge disservice, not only in terms of undermining the other talents they have, but impacting on their sense of self, about who they are and what value they bring to this world. And I think the underlying faith issue or the faith ideal that we have at JFS, that every human being is unique, they're bringing something to this world, it sits very comfortably. I think that your teenage years are years where you are finding yourself, trying to work out who you are. What do you fit into? Where do you belong? I think to be able to do that in a safe environment that nurtures you, understands inherently the community that you come from, just adds value. I've often over the years chatted to colleagues that work in who are heads of non-Jewish schools, and they said it's really interesting. Faith schools, when they have to come and think about their vision, their values, their ethos, it's kind of easy because we've got the Torah, we've got ideas to look at. They often have to make up slogans and statements and they're not really sure who they are and what they're working towards. Here we have a common goal, even though it's translated in many different guises. We talk about Shivim Panim La Torah. I think that in the same way that there might be 70 faces to the Torah and 70 views and 70 ideas, there are multiple ideas. If I've got 2,000 students at JFS, then there are 2,000 ways to express your Judaism and express who you are as a human being. And that's why I think people should send their children to Jewish schools, because even if it lays dormant, even if it's something that a child at that age thinks that they have no interest in, it doesn't speak to them, that spark is always there. But if you don't ignite that spark in the first place, it may well be lost. We have a Cheder system, but it's not as strong as it was from years ago. But even then, over the years, researchers come to say that Cheder doesn't quite have the same kind of impact. And we live in a very different kind of world to perhaps the day where there were no Jewish schools and Cheder was the option. I think you want to be able to step out into the world proud of who you are, not embarrassed about who you are. Sure. And I think being in a Jewish environment does that for you.
And it's an amazing thing, I can go anywhere in the world and I will meet a JFS student. The other week, I was on Kilburn High Road and Dina was in the car and there was a couple of people having a bit of an altercation. They looked like two thugs who were really was going to get nasty. And all of a sudden, one of them turned around and said, "Hey, Rabbi Golker, how are you doing?" And I burst out laughing and Dina started laughing. It was someone who had been in my class. And JFS, as you say, is very, very diverse. But I think really one of the aims for Jewish education is, as you say, to give that child a foundation. Perhaps we didn't do such a good job with that boy on Kilburn High Road, but with all the students, to give them that foundation to try and allow them, whichever direction they go, excel in the secular world and in the Jewish world and in every aspect of their life. I want to turn the conversation to something a little bit different before we open it up to the floor questions. This is really my final question for you, Rachel. I want to talk a little bit about mental health, which is so important and so challenging, especially in the current climate. I know, unfortunately, the school has had some very, very difficult times in recent years with mental health and various cases of suicide and challenges, as has all schools across the country. And I want to know a little bit about the framework that you've set up and what you have in place to ensure that every single student is cared for and their mental health is a priority.
Yes, I think this is a really important area in schools today. And one of the key questions that I'm often asked by prospective parents is, how do you make sure nobody gets lost there? And not in terms of the actual physical building, but in terms of somebody knowing who they are. So there has always been a tradition of a very strong formed tutor group system, that the tutor knows the child really well, and as much as possible, they move up the year groups with that tutor. What I've done in the last few years, and I'm very fortunate that we have been supported by the Wall Foundation, and that we are part of the pilot project on mental health and wellbeing in schools that the JLC is leading. We have a setup. There's always been a school counsellor at JFS, a trained therapist that students can approach to have one-to-one conversations with. And this is particularly important in a day when the CAM services are very hard to access. More importantly, what I've done is I've created what we call the multidisciplinary team, which is overseen by one of my deputy heads, which deals with all things pastoral. And in that team, it includes a social worker, it includes what we call a wellbeing practitioner, whose job is to understand what are the key issues and how do we educate students towards resilience, how do we help them manage challenge, all sorts of educational workshops and experiences. Many of our sixth form have been trained in mental health first aid, and then they go and be peer buddies to younger students. Lots of open conversations. We have Mental Health Awareness Week, where each topic is, each day is dedicated to a different theme, where students can express and talk about important issues. We have an incredible group called Visibility for Disability. Often young people have a variety of disabilities, seen or unseen, that contribute to their own well-being. And these students have got together, and this is real student power at JFS, and they meet, they have a member of staff who supports them. They meet regularly, and once a year we have a whole week where we dedicate to understanding about people who live with disability. We've just started a young carers group. We have many young people in our school who act as carers for their parents, you know, if they've got early onset dementia or they have physical disabilities, who have huge responsibilities at home beyond their schoolwork. We have a group that you know, and they come and educate the staff as well. They come and talk about their experiences to staff. We have mindfulness and well-being support for our staff. So I believe that strong and effective mental health begins with making sure that also applies to the staff. So we have lots of setups for them to interact with one another and to find, you know, things that will help with their own well-being, so that you can't ask somebody whose own mental health isn't in a good place to look after that of somewhere else. We have a really pastoral structure there, and we're beginning to really see, we're waiting to be awarded the Wellbeing at Schools Award for the work that we've done over the last couple of years. So after lockdown, we might have another badge to stick, but we didn't do it for the badge. We did it because it's the right thing to do.
Amazing. Okay, we have some great questions coming in. Just while the audience continue to send us in some more questions, I want to share with everybody a very short video about JFS. It's only about 1 minute long, but just to give you some more perspective, and please keep your questions coming in on the group chat or to me privately. I'm going to share this now. What a fantastic video, and kudos well done to Dov Smith, who does all your incredible stuff. By the way, if anyone doesn't follow you guys on social media, you put out such interesting stuff, and it's great to see. Education, courage, and heritage. What's that about? That's your slogan?
It's a way of encapsulating what it is we're about. Often when I'm speaking at prospective parents' evenings or open mornings, I talk about the 3 pillars that really encapsulate what we're trying to do and the foundations of the school. Education, which is about educational excellence. I've been very careful to say that, and not academic excellence. As I've previously alluded to, I believe every moment at JFS is a teaching moment. So education is your formal education, your informal education, your academic side, your vocational side. You know, walking through the corridor, there are educational elements to that, everything about how we behave, how we interact with other people. So we're looking for educational excellence. I think the heritage reflects our Jewish identity, our ambitions and endeavors for every student to leave the school with a strong Jewish identity that really speaks to them, because it's something that they've evolved over time. And the courage is really all about well-being, mental health, facing challenges. I'm very mindful. I've often quoted to my students a message that I've learned from my mum, but also I think was perhaps formulated a little bit before by Viktor Frankl, the eminent psychologist and Shoah survivor, who talks about life. Effectively, life isn't about what happens to you, but the only thing that we have left to choose when we have no control is our response to what's happening to us. So life isn't about what happens to you, it's how you react and respond. And that's about courage, about being able to face the challenges that we have in life.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really interesting. I have some questions for you, Rachel. First question we have is from a grandmother of 2 grandchildren at JFS. They fear that students may sometimes have a lack of self-motivation because they get lost in such a large learning environment. And I guess with a school with 2,000 students, how do you make sure that, you know, you've got those students who stand out, the naughty kids, the really academic kids, and the really musical kids? How do you make sure that the regular kids who perhaps don't stand out, you make sure they don't get lost in a school of that size?
It's a common question. I think I've referenced some of the things that we do already, but I think it starts at the moment that we know a child is going to come to us, trying to learn and understand about who they are from their primary schools before they arrive, and really keeping on top. That's the job of the form tutor and the heads of year, the pastoral support officers, finding out who's involved in what. We offer lots of extended services and extracurricular activities, monitoring with the students. What are they involved in? Have they been part of something? And trying to encourage them to take those baby steps, communicating with home if we don't see that. Reminding parents to be in touch with us, because like you say, we are looking after 2,000 students. Parents have 1 or 2 at home, and if they see something that they think the school isn't picking up, there are easy channels in which they can be in touch with us and say, actually, we've noticed this, have you noticed that as well? So it's about communication between home and school. It's about encouraging the students to have courage, if you like, to try some new things, because often that's what makes the difference.
I think, you know, just if I may add, one of the things I find incredibly beautiful about JFS is that how every student has a tutor who is not just their form tutor for 1 year, then they move off to a different form tutor. That form tutor stays with them throughout their years at JFS. And in fact, I had a beautiful experience just last week where a student of mine who was in my tutor group for 7 years, he sent me an email to ask if I could confirm his Jewish status for him because he's making Aliyah. And we had that close relationship, and I probably knew him better than any of his other teachers because he'd been in my tutor group. And as you say, there are those well-established channels to make sure that happens. Let me ask you about the next question that we've got over here. One of the challenges that over here this is from Joshua Gavsey, who's written to everyone. What do you think about the concerns that Jewish schools are contributing to segregation in modern society? As a parent of a child in a Jewish primary school, is there a risk that our children will grow up in a bubble? Additionally, that children who go to secular state schools are worse off because they have more limited interaction with the Jewish community. And I'd like to hear your comments, and then if I may, I'd like to add my rabbinical comments to this as well.
Okay, trying to avoid the use of the word bubble, because I think bubble now means something new in the world that we're living in. But I know exactly what you mean. It's an interesting comment, and I've heard it often, that actually we're sort of self-segregating. And I know that there are people who hold those views, and that perhaps you should go out and, you need to be the representative in non-Jewish society. Well, first of all, if you want to represent the Jewish community, you've got to know what you're talking about. And I think many of our young people, even if they've been to primary school, that's quite a hard thing to do. That's a huge responsibility at a young age. I also know that it's not true. You don't find that necessarily your regular state school is a bastion of multiculturalism. You will hear from head teachers in non-Jewish schools that there's segregation within the schools. People stick to their own cultural groups anyway. And that often our students know far more about the world around them than their counterparts. I took an HMI inspector around the school a while back, who stopped in the Jewish Studies corridor and was blown over by the work that the students that was on the wall about the work that they'd done learning about Islam. And I know that the feedback we got from the first year of the RSGCAC, where you had to learn two religions, that the JFS kids knew more about Islam than kids from other schools. And what we try and do is develop those relationships. We welcome students from non-Jewish schools. We're part of the Board of Deputies. They have a program where non-Jewish schools who are learning about Judaism, rather than just take them to a shul and to a restaurant and to shop, why don't they meet teenagers who are also the same age as them? So we do those interactions. We do multi-faith work. We could do more. Of course, we could do more. We go out to schools. They come into schools. And there are opportunities. And the JFS students are actually, they're very involved in sport, in music, in competitions. That they go out there and they get involved. And I think that having school as their sort of backdrop strengthens that what they are able to offer as representatives of the Jewish community at that time. I think they come out more stronger.
Absolutely. I completely agree with everything you've said, but I think also, if I may add, the stronger your roots, the greater your branches will grow. And a child who has very strong Jewish roots will be able to flourish equally as well. I went to a Jewish school all the way through. In fact, a more religious school. I was at Hasmonean. I remember actually my first day of university, having been to a Jewish primary school, a Jewish secondary school, having spent several years living in Israel. And I was there sitting in a lecture hall next to non-Jews. It was my first educational encounter with a non-Jewish person. I was absolutely comfortable, because really that segregation was nothing to do with, from a school perspective was one thing, but from a family perspective and a life perspective, we still had very great non-Jewish next door neighbors and friends and people who my family knew. And that really set me up to be able to communicate with anyone. It doesn't just matter what school you go to. It's really also about your upbringing and how you're brought up with a certain level of tolerance and understanding and interaction with every human being. There are a couple more questions that have come through, if I may share with you. So Mrs. Fink, this all sounds amazing. What a school. But I've come across some JFS students who seem to know not enough about their Jewish history in Israel. And sometimes when they get to campus, they're at a little bit of a loss of how to deal with anti-Israel sentiment. How do we prepare them for campus, and how do we ensure that they are really ready for those challenges?
I agree. I think that that's a problem that exists across most of the Jewish schools. It's an area that we all need to work on better. I think nurturing that love of Israel, first of all, is really important, because you can't stand up for something you have no connection with. So what we do is, obviously in year 9, there are 2 opportunities. You can either spend 2 weeks on the Atoy, the A Taste of Israel trip, or you can go on the longer residential for 3 months, teaching Ivrit, teaching language, making sure that we really start to engage with all sorts of Jewish history. And we need to do it more, because otherwise, like you say, our students arrive at campus somewhat ignorant. I think one of the things that has impacted, and I say this as somebody who did go to Jewish school but grew up also very much part of B'nai Akiva, the youth groups may well have been impacted by the fact that all Jewish kids, or the vast majority of Jewish kids, are in Jewish schools. there's a kind of bring it to me rather I've got to go out and find it, if you like. I would say I learned a lot of my Jewish history and Jewish knowledge about Israel through youth groups. So we've got to find out how we're doing that. So one of the things that our students take part in is the Etgar Israel Challenge, similar to the Etgar Primary School Challenge, which is focused on Jewish knowledge. It's about making sure that topics like the Holocaust are not just taught through a week's trip to Poland, but that's taught as part of history, starting in Year 9, building up, giving students opportunities to engage with Israelis, understand what's going on. And but there is no question that if we have an Achilles heel, and I would argue that it's probably the same Achilles heel across the Jewish schools, because we talk about it a lot as collegiate heads, it is strengthening our students' understanding of Jewish history, Israel, the connection between the two, and why, and how do you, inform your opinions so that they're not just informed by the media that you encounter.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rachel, I think this comes towards the end of our session, and I just guess one final question really from me. In looking to the future, please God, what aspirations do you have for the school? What changes and adaptations might you be making in the future? And what's JFS going to look like a decade down the road from now? What's your aspiration and dream?
Gosh, so I don't think it's a secret that JFS went through a difficult period a few years back, and we are still on our recovery road, if you like. Whilst an outstanding grade from Ofsted isn't the only marker of success, it is an ambition, because I think it's something to strive towards. I want to show that what we're offering as far as a Jewish education is concerned, and I can tell you, I know people out there say, oh, Peacock's not thorough. We had a thorough grilling, a really thorough grilling for 2 days. I want to make sure that what we're offering, that the curriculum is relevant, that we can offer everything. That idea of a broad curriculum where success is, the concept that success comes in all different forms is embraced, that you can be equally proud of your child who goes to Oxbridge, who takes an apprenticeship, who decides to become a plumber, who is a good person because they contribute to society. I want it to be second nature, that when you come to JFS, as part of building your career, you learn to volunteer. It's second nature. Tzedakah is second nature. These are the values that we cherish as a community. So I want us to be known as the school that values a really holistic education moving forward. What will JFS look like in 10 years' time? That's a really challenging question. I can know what I want it to look like. I also know from a financial perspective that that's going to be a real challenge, because if we don't invest in our schools in the future now to build that future, this is not going to be a possibility. The wonderful vocational courses that we offer to broaden that curriculum to meet the needs of the less academic are going to disappear, because we're going to be stuck to doing something really, really narrow. We're bringing, our students have the opportunity to learn business and textiles now, and a whole range of subjects that just weren't there before. But we've got to be able to keep that going, to create that, to make that dream that everybody can be successful in their way a reality. Otherwise, it's just a bit of a pipe dream. But I know that
we wish
is as strong as it can be in 10 years' time as well. 300th anniversary coming up.
Happy birthday! That's an amazing milestone. And as I said right throughout this session, that having worked at JFS was one of the greatest privileges of my life. It is the most exciting place to work. It is a Jewish city, 2,000 kids every year, hustle and bustle and excitement and energy that you see throughout those buildings. I'm sure people listening to this are excited about JFS and might want to get more involved. If anyone here would like to go on a tour of the school or find out more once coronavirus is over, please do get in touch with me. And I'd like to just conclude by saying a huge thank you to you, Rachel, working late hours and joining us here this evening. It has really been an honor and privilege, a compelling conversation for sure. And thank you to everyone for joining us and for all the great questions. And I wish you good health, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thanks for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week, where Diane Binstock will be interviewing Melvin Hartog, to find out about the US burial during the pandemic. Wishing you well and Laila Tov. Thanks, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.